Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 153, posting the edited audio of our live podcast session from last month at South by Southwest EDU. So this is just a great professional milestone and goal for me. I'm so proud of being able to do it and how everything went. I was a little nervous, but look forward to hopefully doing more stuff like this in the future, hopefully being back at the conference next year. But this is a great session titled Adapting to the Hybrid University, great wide-ranging conversation, a lot of good stuff linked out to you in the show notes, so definitely go check that out and connect with all of our panelists. But without further ado, this is episode number 153, live from South by Southwest EDU.
All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming to our session here as a live episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, talking about adapting to the hybrid university. I think this will be generally applicable to most people, just sort of the trend lines that have been happening over the past 2 years, affecting higher ed, but certainly education at large. Yeah, I'll do a brief introduction of myself as well. I'm the creator and host of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. Been doing it for several years, talking to people all across the higher ed ecosystem, both on campus and off, about what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and super excited to be here to record a live episode of the show. But we will go down in order here with brief introductions, your name, where you work, and your professional background.
Okay, hello everyone, welcome. I'm Kelvin Bentley. I serve as a senior consultant with WGU Labs, affiliated with Western Governors University, and I live in Leander, Texas, so not too far from here. And again, thanks for coming.
Cool. I forgot you lived in Texas. That's fun. I'm Matt Tower. I work for a venture studio called Workshop, which focuses on ed tech and climate businesses. I've been in the higher ed industry for a while now, almost 10 years, with startups, with big publishers, and with some online universities. So it's kind of a fun mix of the different aspects of the higher ed industry. And I live in Philly.
Awesome. So hi, I'm Sierra Hamagishi. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, and I've been on all different sides of higher ed as well, from marketing, admissions, international education, the boot camp space, and then I started getting into the technology partnerships with higher education. So now I do most of my work consulting mainly with Unity Technologies, so kind of in the I'm still learning about it, technology side of those partnerships.
Awesome. So really quickly, too, before we get into the actual content of our conversation, I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A on the South by Southwest app. So if you want to submit questions on there, you can do it both anonymously or with your name. We'll go through those questions at the end. I'll also kind of pregame us here with a brief definition of the hybrid university. The way that we're thinking about that is it's really is a byproduct of the past 2 years, sort of what is going to be carrying forward in the short term of everybody having to pivot to remote learning, and that really just leaving an impact on what students expect and how universities operate, where students can shift their modality of learning. They can be on campus but taking most of their classes online, or mostly online coming onto campus for certain things, having staff members, faculty working remotely or working hybrid, and then classes themselves, individual courses being facilitated in a way that students are maybe only coming together in person a few times in the semester, otherwise doing other coursework and expectations online. And you've already seen a lot of programs where it's a completely online social work program, but they have placement portions of that. So there's already a lot of precedent, a lot of institutions that were facilitating learning in this way beforehand, and now they're kind of leaders because they've sort of set up their infrastructure to facilitate hybrid learning before all this. So, the biggest thing too that we're going to be talking about is that this new normal is supporting greater access and success for your commuter students, your adult learners, working students. They all can just have a setup and resources that is more conducive to what they need to be successful throughout their studies. I think we'll just go through, again, kind of down the line in this order. So starting with you, Kelvin, what has been one of the most important changes in higher ed when it comes to hybrid universities? So just kind of starting really big picture, what is sort of like a major thing that's kind of captured your attention about this shift?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say the shift was pretty comprehensive, and so I think, because we talk about a pivot, but then it's amazing to think that whole institutions were rethinking how they were going to offer courses, how they're going to offer services, and again, I think the pandemic definitely exposed a lot of gaps in services, which I saw early on. Back in 2001, when I actually got involved in online learning, I was working for a school in Louisiana, and we were offering courses and programs in psychology, which is my discipline, but we didn't always have access to tutoring and all these other things. And so I'm just impressed that schools found ways to offer services, courses, programs, and remote modality as much as they could, so that they didn't lose students, and they allowed students to kind of continue with their education. So very impressed by that, because as we know, in the past it's been very piecemeal, and I think, and that's just because of the model. It's a legacy model, residential campuses, physical places, and then online was kind of like a bolt-on, and so the pandemic flipped that. And so it's interesting to see what schools did to, help their students as best as they could.
Yeah, I like that you describe it as piecemeal, because it was like, well, we'll do a little bit of this and we'll do a little bit of that. And I think the part about COVID that I'm kind of curious to see where we land is, if you think about the spectrum of like fully online and fully in person, I think most people are like, yeah, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. But like how we get to that middle is interesting. I think there are definitely some schools that are saying online worked out pretty well for us. Like financially, like from enrollment perspective, et cetera, like let's go way out on this end of the spectrum from where we were. And then there's definitely some both institutions and individual faculty members who are like, that was awful. Like I'm going hardcore back in the other direction. And I think for me, looking at it from the venture perspective, it's like, what are the high ROI activities that we do both in person and online that get the student the best experience for them at, financially the kind of best investment level for the school. And I think there's some stuff that you can do online that is really high ROI and doesn't involve a lot of time from the university. And there's some stuff that will be kind of pillars of in-person, even for those kind of adult learners or continuing learners.
Yeah, and just building on what both of you said, what I'm most interested or excited about even is I feel like there was some very closed doors, and I'm coming from the angle of like technology going into higher education, but I feel like it's opened a little bit of a crack, because there isn't always as we said, some people did it because they had to, and some people are going to kind of go back the other way, and I think tech isn't always the answer to everything, but there is some really cool technology that has been given that like little bit of a crack open, and for some schools there's been more administration adoption or openness, maybe by necessity, but maybe some of them are like, that wasn't that bad. And so on the other side, I think that creates a little bit more momentum, and it was cool to see so many higher education, even like ed tech here as well, because I feel like it's been, more K-12 dominant. So I'm excited to see what comes out of that. Like I know, on our side, there's really cool things like a digital twin of a classroom, and maybe that's the answer to the in-person and the outside, and everyone wears the headsets. Maybe it's not, but I think it's been really exciting to see people play around with it a bit, and I think that's a bit of a silver lining, is we might be a couple of years ahead in some of that adoption, and I hope we keep that momentum going forward.
Yeah, and I know when we were talking about this, that it was such a dramatic kind of overswing, like everything had to go online, but that did give people exposure to things that they maybe have been like, no, I don't even care to, interact with that, but people saw what was possible, and then, we're going to have kind of, I think, the pendulum swing back towards the middle, and in terms of sustaining change, like that's something I'm very curious about too, is like, you would think it might be a little bit easier, because it's just like, well, we had exposure because, we had no other choice, and then it is going to still take a lot of thought and planning and consideration to sort of like think about, what worked well, what was, is too much of this or not enough of that, so that it can be, kind of building a coalition where it's like we all agree that this is like, okay, these are the high impact things we want to do in person, and it's supplemented and augmented with all these great tools that are out there, and not thinking that it's like, well, we went online and that's the death of, this or that. It's just like, let's put our heads together and not just completely backslide to where we were, beforehand, because there's just a lot of great potential in all these different tools. So moving on from that, I mean, my background is in student support and student success, so I love talking about this stuff of just, the opportunities with a hybrid university where, again, you're kind of trying to get the best of both worlds and utilize different tools and platforms. So maybe we'll just kind of keep going down this way. I'll just kind of put it simply. How do you see hybrid universities better supporting student success?
Sure, and one thing that I think we also just need to highlight as well, because I've worked for both universities and also community colleges, so our model is inclusive of those institutions as well. And so, I think, again, when I got involved in online learning, I was an assistant professor of psychology trying to build a fully online Bachelor of Science program online. And at the time, we were okay for the most part in terms of identifying the courses and the electives. This was, of course, before programs like Quality Matters, certain faculty development programs. And so we were just really challenged just to do the courses. But the gaps, there were even bigger gaps, though, in terms of access for students to do certain things like online proctoring, right? And so in the early 2000s at schools that I worked for, there wasn't really an online proctoring model. The online proctoring model back then was if you didn't live on campus, go to the public library, and then you can, talk to your teacher about having your exam forwarded to the librarian to be your proctor. That doesn't really work. It doesn't really scale well. Or, go to your local church or, synagogue, and maybe, your priest or rabbi. Your priest or rabbi or minister could be your proctor. And so, I think we do, and this is what I think we're all kind of saying too, we need to be much more intentional in terms of what those online services need to be. They need to be very fluid. So regardless of whether you're taking courses online or not, we need to make sure that there's an easy way for students to get access to proctoring if the course requires a proctored exam. We need to also work with students to make sure that they have access to, academic advising, support. Georgia State University is also trying to do, they've had a lot of success around chatbots and also using them to help field student questions because, faculty and staff are not up 24/7. And so how can you expand the types of questions that, the answers that they would provide to students around their busy schedules. But it's really trying to think about online access, making sure that it is available in a 24/7 way as best as possible, because with work and life challenges that students have, especially adult students, the 9-to-5 schedule of the legacy model that we call higher education just doesn't work.
I'd like to shamelessly promote one of your companies, which I think calls attention to, there are a lot of ways we did things like career counseling and academic advising that were people-driven, which isn't a bad thing. I think, those types of advisors are super helpful, but are built for a pretty specific type of student and don't really have an inherent advantage beyond maybe an early discussion of being in person. Once you've picked your academic track, you can do that asynchronously. So I think being able to kind of break apart that model and, with Lloyd, which is your company, it does the advising asynchronously. So it's if I'm having, existential dread about what I'm going to do after college, I can go talk to my Lloyd career advisor at 2 a.m. Versus having to wait a week to get an appointment with a human in a building that I have to travel to, on a campus that I may or may not, live close to. It's crazy. So I think being able to break apart stuff like that and say what is actually providing value and when is something I'm excited about. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that type of thing.
No, for sure. I think you both gave really good examples of how they could be. And I just wanted to, even being here this week, I think underscore the need to experiment with those, like as the growing, we all know, like everyone here sounds like they're in higher ed, the growing group is going to be a lot of these adult learners or people where the typical schedule doesn't work for them. So how does this not even become, an add-on, but more actually the norm, that a lot of things are just not offered in that, working day schedule? Because the biggest thing I'm hearing is that's going to create a greater level of community and inclusiveness, because it feels like the services are actually designed for when you need them, and the intentionality isn't that it's an add-on or it's a little bit here or there, or only some schools have it, but that we just have that flexibility, as we know the way of the learner population is going to be significantly different. So how do those services align with them? And from the start, just like, oh, that's so cool. Like, like you can talk to them at 2 a.m. That's the norm, and then it feels like it's made for you. And I think it'll be interesting to see retention and sense of community if with some schools start experimenting with that.
Well, and sorry, Dustin, but I think especially pre-COVID, there was like a ton of investment in like the enrollment side of things, and that was important, and I get why it happened. But I think particularly there's a demographic shift, which you're talking about, of there are fewer kind of traditionally aged 18-year-olds who will be going to college over the next 10 years. So I hope that we see the investment shift more towards retention and advising and that type of thing. So it's like, it's not enough just to get you into school, but also we have to get you to persist. And there's a couple of examples that have done well, like Inside Track has been around forever, but even that, I don't know if it was a smashing success financially. Impact-wise, I think it has been. But I'm hoping to see more examples of those types of companies pop up, and even schools building out these services themselves, which I think is definitely doable.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, there's so many. There are different companies too. For us, a part of our team, we have a business accelerator, so we invest in early stage ed tech companies as our. We have kind of this comprehensive model of trying to impact the ecosystem, not just through WGU proper, but how can we do research with vendors and then identify, best practices and all of that. So my hope too is that we're able to, kind of, again, plug the gaps, but then also collect better data about what we're doing. And so I hope we can do more of that. Like we do institutional research fairly well for compliance. But we don't always do a great job because we're very decentralized. It's kind of like, it's like cats, we're kind of herding cats pregnant with kittens that soon will be pregnant with kittens. Like it's very challenging to kind of follow what's going on, and with academic freedom being what academic freedom is, it's like we have to balance that, I think, with the responsibility of being truly learner centric, which we say a lot, but we don't actually we don't do it a lot in practice in terms of those wraparound services and how we structure schedules for students. Capstone courses, for example, might be available for students every other year. It's like, but why? Like, why don't we actually make more of our courses available, not just by modality, but much more often, so that students don't have to skip a beat? So,
yeah, I appreciate what everybody's saying, because I think, and like, something that I've been thinking a lot about is that like the focus on retention, I think, is going to be a story of the next several years, which I think has always been in the ether, but yeah, so much has been on like recruiting students, just like, marketing and enrollment. I think it may be kind of shifting definitely over to retention, and that like there's so many aspects of like investing into embodying the principles of a hybrid university will protect you in terms of like, being more learner-centric, future-proofing in terms of, enrollment declines of the traditionally aged students and those sort of things. And I have been amazed at like, and curious to see how it goes moving forward, but like institutions, getting laptops for students, Wi-Fi hotspots, emergency funds for, unexpected expenses for students, because it's like all of that also helps, like the hybrid university would recruit a more diverse learner that comes from a background that's going to need more of that support to be successful. And yeah, again, it's like we're able to see what was possible, and I'm very curious to, how much people are going to say, well, we only did that because we had to. Like, and it's like, well, if you have the right perspective, you still kind of have to. Like, you have to have some level of investment in all of those resources, and career coaching, student success coaching. And I love chatbots, and I could kind of geek out about those all day. But just having services available at different times, because you have students in different time zones, and they might be doing their field placement for their program somewhere else, but they're going to still need to be like, what am I registering for next semester? Or like, here's how my experience in my placement is going, or, you know, still wanting to be in community with their fellow students and things that are going on campus. So you just need different tools and kind of procedures for that. And I think, yeah, I'll sit on that point because I wanted to mention it. I think, Kelvin, you just had something you wanted to say on this, but like the ideas around community building for students in a hybrid format. Yeah, if you wanted to share some thoughts on opportunities there.
At WGU Labs, we worked with Rio Salato, for example. Some of you may have seen an article in Inside Higher Ed recently that talks about their use of one of the companies that we worked with called Inscribe to kind of help build a sense of belongingness and community with all of the students at Rio Salato during the pandemic. And that's just one example, but I think it's trying to find how can we leverage technology and people to help people feel, again, more connected with each other. Sometimes that's a challenge because, again, if we're talking about it at the course level, if you're in an asynchronous course too, you're kind of moving at your own pace. You may not really have a sense of the other students in the class because the class is not really based on group activities and those types of things. So how can we, what additional connective tissue in my journey as a student can I put out there? Are there opportunities for me to join Zoom calls where there's guest speakers and things like that? I mean, schools do that all the time. School organizations trying to also gather folks remotely as well as face to face. But it's trying to figure out, like, outside of the courses, can schools do a better job of actually again, reinforcing those connections. We're even working with an alumni engagement company called Protopia, which is very interesting, where their platform, I think, does a really good job of kind of connecting alumni who want to contribute back to their institution through asking questions. We do this already, like on Facebook and things like that, like, hey, like, I'm going on a vacation, can you tell me the best place to stay? But with Rotopia, it's nice because it works in the background. It gives you as alumni a chance to connect back with current students at a particular school at your alma mater. And then you can actually do kind of pseudo mentoring as well as just maybe you work for a company that a student is interested in getting into, and so you can build those connections a little bit better than some of the networks that are out there, like Handshake, where everyone's just kind of on the platform, but then there's not always that connectedness that's needed, where there's active people following through with questions and answers. So I'll pause there.
I think like one of the things that I am curious about and have no idea what the answer is how connected like any sort of community effort has to be to the academics that the student is taking at that point in time. So, and I think we're considering this in the working world too, where it's like, do I have to go to my company's office to get the value of being in an office? Or can I just go to a co-working space near me? Similarly for students, like to persist through college, do I need to be like in the same academic, structure as the people around me, or that studying the same thing? Like traditionally, I think we've segmented into your major. Like you hang out, if you're an engineering major, you hang out with other engineers. Or can it just be more of a library environment where it's like, you study English, I study engineering, you study architecture, and we're all kind of okay with that because there's value in us just like sitting together. So that connection to academics, I think, is mysterious to me.
No, just throwing in there. When you were saying that, it reminded me, I was going to speak about later, is that's one thing that's kind of pulled from the boot camp model too. Like a lot of them have experimented with, we don't have a physical space, but if you have multiple years together, especially for like some harder subjects, you get that like mentor aspect of like the second year, third year, and then you get the knowledge of even teaching someone. But then the cross one, and maybe interesting projects or programs or something like that, where you have cross collaboration projects. I'm not as sure about that one, but the multi-year one or physical location in the same space and get that peer mentorship, I think is interesting.
Yeah, the hybrid college model is also very interesting to me because I think, they're really kind of targeting, I don't know how many people know about hybrid colleges. There's one here in Austin called Peloton U. They're typically hyper-local, and so the Duet a hybrid college was kind of one of the first ones, and it was a partnership between SNU and the folks that kind of created Duet. So the idea is, it's a CBE, competency-based education model, online, but we're going to actually have like a physical space, right, for students to actually like come, get to know each other. Sometimes, again, the home environment, and especially, the home environment can be very chaotic. So like working from home for many of us is okay, but for some people, home is not really, it's one of the last places you actually want to be in terms of trying to take courses and complete a degree. And so I like that model because at least they're trying to say, yeah, you can do some things online, you can come to a physical space that's safe, you could also meet other students, get reinforcement and encouragement from them. And so that network is very interesting to follow. TRIO is also trying to take the TRIO New College Network is trying to take the Duet model and actually scale it across different cities. They're in 3 now, 2 in New Jersey, Camden, and Newark, New Jersey, and then the other one is in Detroit, which is my hometown. So that's why I'm kind of bullish on them, because I'm a native Michigander living in Texas for some reason, but it's because of Austin School, but the rest of Texas, I don't know. But politics. But anyway, but I think, again, I think the hybrid model is kind of cool. The hybrid college model is cool because it's intentionally saying, yeah, we do need a mix. And not to say that universities and community colleges can't do that as well. But the cool thing there, I think they're also saying, yeah, we're going to provide this competency-based mastery model, which not all colleges and universities have embraced. So maybe in the next few years that'll happen too.
Yeah, I'm thinking just a lot of stuff with what everyone's mentioned of I think there's a sliding scale of a lot of these things, because it could be okay, I'm a fully online student, but I do want to have the opportunity in some places, institutions or programs have dabbled with having a co-working membership, so you could try to just have a place to study that's quiet and you can focus and those sort of things. And then you have a lot of students, even if they're online, study within a certain geographic radius. So it's do we just make sure that they feel welcome and have the ability to get into the spaces you already have on campus. And then there's one part of this conversation is all about the tools, but I like that we were kind of talking about the philosophy that we'd go in engaging students, where I've heard that a lot of times it is going to be tethered to the academic experiences, where you want in that class there to be a lot of collaboration and socialization, because people are going to want to talk about what they're studying to process it together. And again, on sort of the sliding scales, you'd probably want to still have those opportunities for just the whole community to come together, where it's just different people colliding because they're all seeing a great speaker. And then you'd also kind of want to have the sliding scales of, the in-person live things that you just had to be there for, but people still could watch a live stream if they can't physically be there, but they still feel part of it. And then asynchronous engagement opportunities, where it is we have a Slack channel for our program or our school or just the whole college, where chat's happening, you jump in when you're able and see the resources or things that people are talking about. So you can kind of dabble with a lot of those things. Yeah.
Well, and this extends to the faculty too. I think this is happening more in K-12 with the flipped classroom model, where the teacher is becoming a lot more of a coach than they are a subject matter expert. And that's kind of a funny concept to think about in higher ed, where we're so used to the professor being, they have a PhD in whatever specific thing you're learning. Even if you don't necessarily need to be a super advanced math person to teach algebra or calculus or whatever. So I think that's something that feels maybe the furthest away from breaking in higher ed. That'd be a pretty big jump. But I think it gets to what is the activity that actually helps the student? Do they need the super expert, or is it really they just need a push in the right direction?
Right, you could encourage. There's a lot of different ways again to do this. I've seen you're embedding something in the LMS that makes the faculty more accessible to ask questions, or a TA, or just even a different format where it's you're engaging with clips of lectures and different content in the course, and then when you're having a live session or the class time, that interaction is different. It's not just being talked at for an hour and a half. It is that they're trying to coach through, okay, so we reviewed all this content, what questions do people have, or those sort of things. And Yeah, and I did kind of want to talk about like the learning environment too, and I'll stick with you to start with this, Matt. Is like, yeah, students being able to flow between online and in person, like that being definitely a big principle of the hybrid university, and just implications of that. Because I know we when we were prepping, kind of talked about this of like, you know, how that might be facilitated or structured for students, because like they would have that choice, and it's like, well, we could sort of encourage them to do it in a way that might be more conducive to their success.
Yeah, and I think like this is the fun question of like how much agency do you give students? Because it's, you know, if you give particularly a traditional college student a choice, they're probably going to choose to not go to the classroom if they don't have to. So it's how much do you force a choice? How often do you force a choice? What type of space do you give to them? Like, again, drawing from like the working world, there's two schools of thoughts on returning to the office. One is, you know, top down, we're mandating that you have to come back, which, you know, we're seeing in all the papers, workers are not super excited about. Then there's another where, you know, I was talking to John Katzman, who founded Noodle, that where you work, and he's like, yeah, we're getting a like kick butt space that we think our employees will want to come to. Like, we're going to get an awesome gym. We're going to have awesome like facilities in the space. You're going to really want to be there. And I can imagine a scenario where that's also true on college campuses. They obviously have a lot more built infrastructure, so it's a little bit harder to change the way, you know, Noodle can just like go to a different building and build it out differently. But I would love to see something like that, where it's like we're trying to earn students' belief that they should go to class, rather than mandating like you got to go sit in the like little lecture chair.
Yeah, and to help make them, I mean, I think again back to like this idea too of schools needing to be more learner-centric, right? Like the student voice is key. And again, and I'm not here to necessarily beat up higher ed, because I've been in higher ed for over 20 years, and you know, as a teacher, as an administrator, as a consultant. But again, there's a huge opportunity for us. Like if we have an institutional research office, I think we really need key people, you know, data scientists, folks who have, again, a research acumen to kind of help schools collect the data that will, you know, help students make a more informed decision, so that agency that we give them hopefully will be a reflection of data, like data patterns. My hope too is that simply maybe, you know, to kind of make it more tactical, can we do a better job, for example, in terms of really exposing or lifting up the hood for students about what they're getting themselves into? We do that on a basic level, if you think about it, through syllabi that we post, right? And so students have a kind of a general sense, but if they could even have an opportunity to see some of the videos, I guess, that are being posted, or to even have more of an opportunity in webinars to talk to past students, right, who talk about what the class was like for them, what the challenges are, what are some things they could be doing to you know, prep themselves, motivate themselves. And I don't think we do enough of that. I think there are examples there, but the more that we can make higher education more transparent, as well as, you know, the modalities and the services, but that transparency layer is missing. And if I had all the money in the world, what I would do is I would try to find a way to actually, you know, give schools funds to actually create some type of transparency practice, right? So helping them to actually do more to show that the types of courses, the programs, and share that information easier, so that it's much more accessible than it is today.
I would love if there were teaser trailers for courses, like that idea where it's just like 3 minutes or less, professor is saying like, this is what's going on. Because like usually all it is like a paragraph of text that's maybe, you know, kind of bland, and that idea that you can kind of see that. And I think sort of like where I'm like connecting some dots in my head is like, you know, you have students who can free flow, choose an online course or in person, and, you know, any mix of those that they want. And then like certain courses, they could have a choice of, like you have an in-person section or an online section, and then maybe even making it clear like, well, this, you know, first year seminar course, we have small in-person sections, like, you know, because we've have looked at the numbers, and we find that students rate higher levels of satisfaction with building community, making friends on campus, or those sort of things. And then these other courses, they do incredible online, but just because they really benefit from various tools or things like that. So yeah, because I know we talked a little bit about that of like you'd want to sort of shepherd in and like give students some choice, but that they at a certain point in their studies, like if it is like, well, you maybe want to be more in person in your first year, and then kind of have a little bit more flexibility moving forward. So again, like there's not going to be sort of the only one best way to do this. You have to think through like what is our strategy, like what's the kind of experience that we want to give to our students, and have kind of a bit of transparency around the justification for why, not just like, well, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here. It's just anecdotal, just because I said so, because I whatever. It's based on like, especially because any place should have a basis where it's like, yeah, we had to try this. We were online, and we, hopefully are surveying our students and analyzing that data, and are utilizing that to inform strategy moving forward. So really quickly too, because I'm always curious on that, because I think it's just had such a boom in the past couple of years, and certainly a lot over the past two, is your boot camps, your short courses, other forms that are not enrolling in a 4-year degree program. How do they factor into the strategy of a hybrid university? And we'll go backwards this way this time.
Yeah, sounds good. And I feel like just coming from different angles that Kelvin and Matt will probably talk a lot more about, laddering or how we're going to fit those all together. But having spent a little bit of time in the boot camp space, as I alluded to earlier, I think it is interesting to look at them. And I know I would totally recognize that they had none of the restrictions that a traditional university or a community college would have, but there are some interesting, I think, aspects to play with, like the one we already talked about the physical space, the idea of, like a technology queuing system for how you would have answers at asynchronous courses or times where you're doing things independently, as well as another one I'd really like to look at is the cohort model, and that kind of someone who's in charge of your career services and has that group to pull them through. I think all of those are reasons why they've seen a lot of traction, or a lot of people have decided to go through them because they really know of what's going to push through afterwards. I don't think they've all done them to the same success level, and I realize there's restrictions on how those could be incorporated, but I think in terms of people wanting to go to campus, I know some of the boot camps that have gone fully online, some of them are wanting that in person because it's technical and they really want to be there, and if they're going to invest that much money, they want to be around a person. So there's some aspects to look at them in general, and how they've structured those in both the boot camp world and another one I'm close to, the continuing ed world, where people are really, really choosing to be there. And then, as we know, that's the growing population. What do they have that they're doing well? And then what could you maybe play around in that area of the institution to see what might work for our more, like, what do we call, like, traditional one as well? Because some of them might take a continuing ed or a really interesting, like, technical course. So that's just my angle of it, coming more from the technology side, and like having been in a boot camp. I know there was a lot of people that chose that for specific reasons, but I agree what you guys will probably get more into. They have to be intentional, and they have to, like, for some people, you don't want it to be too big of a sell and not really lead somewhere. So there's a caution on the other side too.
Yeah, well, and I think the market across even traditional universities too, like if you think boot camp, short courses, traditional universities, is just really chaotic, because like every single player in the ecosystem is trying to, win people to their specific solution, right? So like the boot camps are going to say like, come here, we'll get you a $100,000 job in 3 months, like super pithy pitch. The short courses are like, you can have, a Google stamp on your resume. And the traditional universities are like, your expected earnings are $1 million higher if you get a degree through us. But they all have an agenda, right? Like everybody's like winning to their side. And, if you choose a boot camp, it means you don't choose a short course or you don't choose a university. So I think the area that I'm excited for on a macro level is somebody who's going to like help steer me through, and who doesn't have a vested interest in me going to a specific boot camp or a specific short course provider or even a specific university. And I think there are websites that like do this kind of, but most of them get a kickback on the back end that's like, oh, we talk about all the universities, but really there's like 7 that we prefer you go to. So I think there's a model somewhere that says, like, we're going to help you effectively navigate this, where you could actually stack them. I think that is a really exciting concept, but I don't know really of any players in the ecosystem that can do that as an actual neutral arbiter that don't have, some incentive to place you in a specific program.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it's interesting to see what will happen to, and maybe this is kind of off topic a little bit. I've been thinking about the Amazon Career Choice Program. So many of you have probably heard, Amazon decided not to go with an intermediary like Guild Education and others. Like they're trying to provide a way for their employees to, continue their education or start their education, get credentials. There's over 140 schools, that Amazon has blessed, to be a part of this program, which is interesting. But then, I just wonder, like, I love to see the data over time in terms of like, because it includes, I think, short course programs too, right? So it'll be interesting just to see, like, given that there's so many choices, I'm hoping that Amazon can be neutral on some level. Obviously they're biased because they picked they picked the 140 plus schools, and there's over 7,000 providers, based on IPEDS data that provide college degrees and certificates and all of that. And so it'll be interesting just to see how they steer students. And maybe there are some good practices there. Maybe actually you're on to something about maybe, we need to get venture capitalist funds and actually kind of create some type of, because we talked about career coaching, right? But maybe there is like a long life education coach that can actually help, steer students.
The ironic thing is, like, the way to stay neutral is to have the customer pay you directly, right? Instead of getting a referral fee. But the irony is, like, students are students often because they don't have the money, right? They're trying to get a higher paying job. So there's like this dissonance where you can't ask the student to pay you directly, and as soon as you take money from a different provider, you lose your neutrality.
I just wonder what's going to happen, because there's 100, if there's 140 schools, they all vary on terms of tuition. The modality is almost kind of like, whatever, it's like online, face-to-face. Not all of them are competency-based education providers, so it'll be interesting just to see if, again, a WGU or a SNU or some of the larger, the mega universities that have done well in online, will they basically still dominate across those schools, because they have. So to be continued.
Yeah, I'm very interested in stackable credentials, and I feel like it's like, we'll mark that one off on your bingo card. I feel like another buzzy word from like the conference, but because I think there's so much there about like time and cost for students if they're kind of just like navigating on their own. It's like, well, actually, if you took this AWS, certificate, it can actually at a particular place lead you towards getting, some other certificate or other credential. And it's tough if you can navigate through it sort of agnostic, but certain institutions have really done well with that, or different platforms that have short courses on them help get like preferred admission or give credit for degree programs. So I feel like all of that, I think has happened a lot more in the online space as part of the strategy of like a hybrid university and a way to potentially bring more students in. And I know some people came in late. I am keeping an eye on the Q&A on the South by Southwest app. So after this question, I'll check in there for any questions that folks have for us. But as I always do on my podcast, we will end with a final thought or call to action on this topic. So I guess we'll take it back around this way. Kelvin, if you want to kick us off, any final thought, call to action?
Yeah, I think that my call to action is, again, transparency. How can we actually help students know what they're getting themselves into in terms of the courses and programs we offer, regardless of modality? We need to be much more intentional and strategic in terms of how we actually create this idea of the hybrid university. And maybe again, another way to think about it is it's the hybrid student, right, or the digital learning student. Like, how do we actually, again, provide flexible services, courses, programs, unbundle them, so that, again, students don't have to eat the whole hog. Maybe I'm in Texas too long, so apologies for saying that for all our vegetarians out there. But, how do we actually help students really, take on higher education in bite-sizable chunks that work for them around their schedule. So I think those are the things. And we need to do a much better job of data collection. So if we're going to throw technology and we're going to experiment with modalities and we're going to do all this stuff, let's collect the data. And if IR, institutional research, can't do it, let's create new units. Let's get the right people involved to do it, working with the faculty, because again, faculty are very decentralized, right? So how do we actually learn from their power, their academic freedom? How do we actually glean good practices from them? And also, let's not lose the learner. So let's ask the learner repeatedly, how's our driving, right? How's our education? What is your experience like? And let's not just wait until after the course or after they leave us. Let's, ask them repeatedly during their time with us in whatever ways we can.
Yeah, so we talked at the beginning of the spectrum of like fully online to fully in-person colleges, and I think what I'm excited for is the diversity of options I think we'll see on that spectrum across the landscape. We've got, I think it's like 4,500 degree granting universities in the US right now. My hope is that we see all 4,500 of them placing bets along the spectrum and saying, we're going to do, they won't actually pick a percentage, but call it 60% online, 40% in person. And, the college down the street that, previously offered fairly similar programs is going to be 35%, online and 65% in person. So I think that is potentially really exciting. It's a little bit terrifying because I think, there's definitely the chance for a lot of institutions to go out of business. But my hope is it leads to a lot of experimentation and in the super long term that we find a happy medium that's actually better for the student. I have no idea what percentage it is, but I'm excited for the experimentation.
Yeah, for sure. And I would take, I guess, a partnerships angle to everything. I feel like, it's exciting and there's a lot of things that we could whiteboard or look at a lot of examples or technology I mentioned, and it can definitely feel overwhelming. But the way I like to structure them and getting to those percentages or incorporating a lot of those services is, I guess, to take some of the scary part away for schools is kind of those first steps. Like I've seen a lot of success when they maybe just start with something that's non-credit or something that's lower stakes and experiment with how you want to do that in this hybrid environment or one of the ones that's naturally more technical by nature and see that first step really get, as Kelvin said, like the student feedback along the way. And why I go toward the non-credit or the continuing ed is because I mentioned a lot of them really want to be there and they're paying to be there and they're going to be the most open to it. And so fitting to that student or just one aspect first, I think is a good area to start. And then I've seen it ripple back well into, more the undergrad or the master's or the other areas as well. So that would just be my I'll let Dustin take it home. But my kind of advice, if all of that felt like that's a long to-do list if you're a higher education institution.
Yeah, because I think what we had talked about too is some places don't even get any student feedback or satisfaction. And then it's that and really being smart about showing okay, well, we implemented a new tool or did something different. Did more students pass the class? Did we see higher retention? Did we see, even just less stress? Because I think sometimes it could be an ed tech tool says students love using our platform, and it's cool. Okay, so what is the impact of that? Of they're using it, they're engaging with it. Does it actually, help kind of produce those outcomes that everyone is looking for? But yeah, we're kind of right on time, so I want to make sure we get to questions in the time that we have left. And I really like this one. Getting faculty and staff engagement around these adaptations to the hybrid university, and something I think a lot about is there can be kind of a burden on implementation and people actually utilizing hey, we got this shiny new tool for course design or something to kind of do task management in your support office to get inbound requests and do things like that. So any thoughts on that of helping to support with training and onboarding orientation faculty and staff around all these different ways of working and tools, those sort of things?
Because I've participated in faculty development planning around online over the years, I would say definitely similar to what we're talking about in terms of flexibility of information and access, I think faculty benefit from, having different flavors of faculty development experiences. So the more that you could actually have, not just face-to-face things, but just-in-time, experiences, where folks can, meet online synchronously during webinars to learn about the technology, but then also based on what you were just saying too, like linking it to why are we even doing this, right? I mean, because again, the headwinds will always be, I don't have enough time, and this is one more thing I have to do. I'm already burnt out because of the pandemic. So, but if you could link it back always to students, also having, maybe even bringing in guest speakers from other institutions that have tried to implement the technology, and then ask them to bring on students to talk about what was the impact for them, right? Those stories will definitely help support any faculty development opportunities that you make available, but it's connecting those dots. Faculty need to see that there's a benefit to students, and if you don't show that, it's much harder. Like, it's very easy for them to poo-poo it and say, "Oh, you're just making me do busy work, and I'm already oversaturated and burnt out because you're asking me to innovate too much."
I think also hire more teachers. There's this trend towards adjuncts, which has been a long-term trend, and adjuncts get paid like garbage, often treated like garbage, and if they're teaching 4 classes at 4 different colleges or universities, it's going to be hard to get them to change. But I think there's a very, very nascent trend towards hiring professional teachers in the classroom. WPI, I think last year, was the first institution to offer a tenure track teaching position. So that's something, we talked about experimentation, that's something I'm really excited about. I don't think that's really been a model, at least in the past 100 years, in higher ed. So you have to try stuff like that to see if you can get better faculty engagement that way.
Yeah, and so I guess this would kind of bridge onto what Calvin was saying a little bit, because I definitely agree with you. But I think, if you don't get that, or you kind of have the faculty that you have, if you pull back the curtain a little bit on, to be honest, when you're selling into schools or you're in partnerships, I think the most important thing is to have that key player advocate, because if you push it on them, same as with the students, it's not going to ripple through. They're going to have all that same ripple back, or the point they're understaffed. So it's finding that advocate who's really interested in it and letting them kind of organically reach it out to the ones that make sense. And that's where I've seen the most traction. That's how you, to be honest, that's how you sell into a school. So that's the same way I think a school could have the philosophy of internal adoption. Who do you make put into that role that maybe wasn't seen or heard as much, and can be a new position for them to kind of help lead that change.
Right, and collect that data, right? So if you're piloting, because I do believe in that organic spread, but I think the danger, though, is just it could still die on the vine, right? So you can have your champion, and then he or she might just do it, or they might do it in their class, but then it never really scales. And so there has to be almost like that executive sponsor to say, yes, we're going to pilot, we're going to collect data, we're going to share that out, we're going to be transparent, and then we're going to use that information to decide what do we do next, right? Do we stick with this vendor? Do we maybe look at other vendors? We'll do a formal RFP process. What are we going to do to actually, make this technology or this pedagogical change stickier at our institution?
Yeah. Well, and if you commit to something, commit to it. I think, because sometimes it could be they have all this stuff. Why aren't they using it? It's maybe you need to do an annual training. And I think a lot of what I'm hearing too, which has been something I've heard a lot too, is you might have the vendor trainer come in, and they're really good at what they do, but there's sometimes just the trust that, if it's a fellow faculty, it's somebody they know, or those sort of things of getting a champion, all that kind of stuff, I think is a big part of the strategy. And then follow through, and the kind of nudges, if you're seeing great, we're seeing increased engagement with the tool, and we're doing trainings annually or as needed. So all good stuff there. But I'll jump to another question, because this one could be maybe a quick rapid fire. What higher education tools and technologies do you see as core for hybrid learning. I know one for me, because I could get about it, would be like chatbots, because it allows for this 24/7 accessible central point for a student to ask questions, hopefully get them answered, or then redirected to the best person to answer that question. So I feel like that's something that's core to hybrid learning. So I don't know, maybe if each of us just does one.
Yeah, learning management systems, of course. And then I would make a strong case for tutoring, online tutoring systems, not just people who do tutoring, but then also systems like a tutor.com, for example, where the data actually can be accessed by the faculty. So faculty can kind of track how students are doing in the tutoring sessions and then use that data to make pedagogical changes in their instruction.
Physical space, like start from like if you want to offer a hybrid course, like why should you have physical space and what does that space look like? I know that's not a tech tool, but like I think it's pretty core if you're really going to be hybrid. Otherwise, you should just be online if you can't answer that question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I felt like we were going to get a laundry list there. I think it would just be even choosing the, like you said earlier, like owning which one you're going to have, because having 10 or 15 or whatever that we suggest, it's like people need one place to go, for their learning. So it's a little bit one that's a little bit more of like a platform. I know that's a huge issue right now. So just kind of owning where the spot that the students are going to go. And I think that that's going to be really, really key, because especially when you start not being in the physical space, you're getting those reminders, you have cognitive overload from everything you're learning. I think that almost like simplifying the technology in a way is what's really going to make that a lot more successful. Yeah,
I know we've all kind of name dropped a couple different companies and stuff. One that I saw on the show floor that I was very impressed with was Pathify. It did that. It basically is like a dashboard that can aggregate SIS, LMS, and everything. So it'd be the one-stop shop that a student would go to, and there's like, you can see your clubs that you're involved in and all this stuff. And if you're like, oh yeah, I see that it gives me this reminder of like, hey, you have an assignment due tomorrow, you'd click through and it would take you to the LMS, but like, you don't have to have like 20 bookmarks and, different things. You would just be like, what do we need to do today? Like you just go to that dashboard and you can see all this stuff and submit a form to financial aid, and, the student can manage their workflow, but also the institution. So I thought this was an interesting one. It might be just if one person has an answer to it, I kind of have my thoughts, because we do have a lot of things that have developed around standard for online learning, but not for hybrid learning. So that idea that we would want to have one of these, institutions or, organizations here try to outline that would give people kind of some level of structure for how to maintain a certain level of quality. Because I've written and spoken about like, okay, these are the principles of a hybrid university. It would be like, okay, let's have the online learning consortium, bring that together, get input, like those sort of things. I'm curious if like folks think that would be like at this stage, a valuable use of time is to have kind of a stamp of approval of like a rubric or.
I can see it both ways. I mean, I think the Quality Matters program, the rubrics from the Online Learning Consortium are helpful. I think we almost need something else. So instead of like, again, checking a box, it's like, how can we engage in activities, right? And again, I'm sorry I've been saying data, but we need to do almost kind of like a 360 review of our capacities to actually offer the services and the programs that we've been talking about today in a flexible way, and just identify those gaps, and then to your point, commit, right? Look at our funds and see how we're going to gradually fill those gaps and help our students. Again, be learner-centric. If we say it, let's do it, let's commit to it, and invest in it. So that, again, we can be much more helpful than we are.
Yeah, I think as long as it's like a consortium, like the Online Learning Consortium, and not, I don't think we're ready for a standard. I think we just have no idea what the right mix is. So if it's collaborative and collegial, like great. If it's like somebody trying to say like my way is the best way to do hybrid, I would kind of not be interested.
I'm going to say more of the same, kind of like learn from your peers. And I think that we've already hit a lot of the points that would do that as well. Like asking the students as well and checking in with them is going to give us a lot of traction, because I think it's going to be so unique individual to the program and to the way that institution is traditionally operated, and then like going back to the persona of the student that's there.
Very good point. Yeah, because whatever is stewing and marinating over the next several years of what might develop, certainly important to have the student voice in that as well. But we're right at time, so we'll leave it there. Thank you so much to my awesome guests here, and for everybody in the room for hanging out and asking great questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but it's a topic that I love talking about. So thank you so much for hanging out.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.